Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And today is the second session for this week, well, the final one, for you to ask questions related to your Lab 0 Part 2, Word Review Tutorial Series Part 2. I saw just one more Google Doc question from yesterday. So as usual, if you want to refer to other Q&A recording from yesterday, you can definitely do it. Just go to lecture site. Let me show you quickly. If you go to the lecture site, like last week, so you will see under week number 2, you can see the recording from yesterday. You can always refer to the timestamps on the video, and that shows you the topics that were discussed in the Q&A. And today, I just want to go over some announcements. I'm gonna talk about the announcement in the beginning, just to remind you about a milestone you should really watch out for, and also I will talk about the one question I saw, the remaining question I saw on the Google Doc, and then to see if you got any follow-up. And then I will speak about maybe Lab 1 and also your written test 1, if we got time. But we should have time today. I have one question here. Can I post Lab 1 on my website? You know, I think for Lab 0, Part 1, Part 2, those are mainly just to follow the tutorial videos. It's not really something that should be kept confidential. So that's why I posted it on my lecture site. But I think for all your subsequent labs, starting from Lab 1, you should only get access to them on the e-class. Okay, so I think we might stick to this. Otherwise, you know, if I need to do any updates on the lab manual, I got to do on 2 places, which is not very consistent. Okay, but if you want to get access to your lab instructions, you can always go to e-class. If they really got crashed down, for example, you can always email me, and I can send you a local copy if needed, or I can just post it if that's really absolutely necessary. That's what I will do. Okay, so let me talk about some announcement to begin with. Okay, your Lab 0 Part 2 is actually due tomorrow. Okay, Lab 0 Part 2, about following the Part 2 of the tutorial videos. Okay, and it's going to be due tomorrow, Friday, and notice that the due time as specified in your lab manual. I think some of you may still be a little bit confused for the first time, but it's being clearly written. It's actually 2 p.m. EST. It is not 12 midnight. No, it's 2 p.m. Okay, I'm gonna stick to this due time for the subsequent labs as well. So you always got the same due time and day. And your lecture week number 3 on exceptions was already released since Monday. So if you haven't really get started on studying the lectures, I will highly recommend you actually try to get started, maybe even concurrently with completing your Lab 0 Part 2 and also even Lab 1. So I think it's really important. Your written test next week, not this week, but next week, is going to cover lecture week 3. So you also want to get prepared for the Q&A session maybe next week if you got any questions. Okay, and also for your lab number 1 on the OOP program, so that one was released officially yesterday on Wednesday. You got, including today, you got about 8 days to actually complete this lab exercise. So please start early, and then so if you got any struggle, you can reach out to me, or you can just drop by the TA session. Either way, okay, you got many means for getting help. And for your written test, I will also speak about it. Written test number 1, it will take place next Thursday and Friday, September 30th and October 1st. You should really refer to the guide specifying the policies and also coverage that I sent to you earlier this morning. But I will go over that with you quickly, just point out some highlights. But it's your responsibility to really read it over and make sure you're clear. And there are also some practice questions on the e-class, which you can try it out for as many times as you like. But notice that the submission for those practice questions will be closed shortly before the actual test starts. Maybe about Thursday, about 1:55 p.m., right before the actual test starts. So you want to make sure you practice that if you wish, as soon as you can. So that's about the quick announcement I want to make. Do you have any questions related to administrative issues? Any questions? Any concern about deadline? Anything that's unclear to you, you can feel free to ask me now. Okay, one question about how long will the written test usually be. Each is usually 20 minutes. You can also check the guide. It's actually specified there. No problem. Any other questions? So guys, I do believe for most of your doubts, if you have later about how the test is going to be run, most of them should be already addressed by the starter guide. The preparation guide. So if you really have doubts, of course you can email me always, but you can always check the PDF first. I think most likely you can save your time by just checking it. All right. Okay. Seeing no question here, I would like to talk about the only question I saw that was new from the Google Doc. But again, for other questions on the Google Doc, you can also refer back to the recording from yesterday. I got timestamps over there. You don't need to watch the recording entirely. Just go to the ones you want to watch. Okay. I want to mention one more thing before I start going over the Google Doc questions over here. So if you go to the 2030 website over here, just make sure, I'm pretty sure you're very familiar with it by now. And then go to semester calendar. Let's look at that together, just to remind ourselves where we are. We are now here today, the 23rd. So if you haven't really caught up with the course, you really want to catch up, as soon as you can. So at this point, it should have already started, I hope, at least lecture week number 3, and also your lab number 1, so that even though they are due around the late next week, but you really want to start early, so if you got any struggle, you don't need to leave that to yourself. You can just ask for help, either from me or from the TA, okay? And then your Lab 0 Part 2 is going to be due tomorrow, Friday, 2 p.m. And also next week, we're going to follow this regular pattern, for the course. Your new lecture will be released again on Monday. And then you got your written test over here. For your upcoming programming test 1 before the reading week, is coming in about 2 weeks, but I will give you, again, some preparation guide and also some practice tests about a week before the programming test. But I think if you actually follow through Lab 0, Part 1 and Part 2, make sure you clarify all the doubts. And also if you do your Lab 1, try to understand every step you're doing, and of course always reach out to me if you got any questions, and also do the practice test. You should be all right. That's what I think. All right, anyway, so that's about where we are at the moment. Okay, all right, let me now go over the question on the Google Doc. It's just to clarify some implementation detail for one of the methods, and let me just read the question together with you. This one shouldn't take too long. So for part 26 of the tutorial video, okay, you can go to that particular part if you wish. That's just from your fellow students' question. Why are we setting the index to -1 and not 0? Okay, so your fellow student was basically talking about this method over here. So get products method from the refurbished store, that class. And then you can see for the first line, we assign integer index to be -1 over here. Okay, and also I put some comments in the tutorial video, which I didn't really include. I'm running out of space on my iPad, but you can refer to it on your tutorial videos. Okay, so the question was, why are we setting this initial value to be -1 rather than 0? Okay, I'll put a question mark over here. That's your fellow student's doubt. I think it's a very valid doubt. And let me just read through the rest of the question. I know it is expected to be reassigned to a valid index if the serial number exists in the store. Accurate, that's very good. But I don't fully understand what that implies. Okay, so that's a question. Hopefully you can see what your fellow student might be confused about. So let's see this. Let me just, it's really important to actually notice that the most important part logically is over here. So this is to say, if the serial number input, if the input serial number exists in the store, reassign the index over here, initially -1, to some valid index, right? The valid index will be whatever I it is at the current iteration, and I is guaranteed to be valid because the way we actually control the range of I is exactly over here, right? You can see over here we have I initially to be 0, and 0 for sure is a valid index, right? If you can remember this visualization we did in the tutorial video, index 0 for sure is always a valid index over here, right? Starting from some valid index, and then I is strictly less than this.noe. And we talk about the 2 purposes for NOE also in the part 2 of the tutorial video. You should also review that. It's really important for second purpose. So NOE always specify the next index to actually store the next entry to be stored into the array. So when we say strictly less than that, it's also guaranteed to be invalid, right? Sorry, it's guaranteed to be valid. Beg your pardon. Guaranteed to be valid. And then we just increment I by 1 each time. All right, so now let me get straight to your fellow student suggestion, which could be maybe a written test question, to be honest with you. Let's see. So here's the question. If I actually say rather than -1 over here, I will set it to be 0. Let's say. Number one, I want to know that 0 over here is a valid index. Okay, I'm hoping that you can follow my logic. I know even before I go over the code. If you actually initialize the index to be some valid index 0, number one, okay? And number two, let's say the input serial number does not exist in the refurbished store. Say the serial number input does not exist. Okay, negative, and also, and so what will be the consequence of number two? If that does not exist, so that means this particular Boolean condition over here will actually never be true, because none of the existing entry will actually get their serial number matching. For example, let's say over here, we got this serial number here, this serial number over here, and this serial number here, right? We got three of them. You can see F9, FD, C9, FZ, and also 7YN4, whatever, right? So we got three different serial number. And let's say if the serial number input does not exist, let's say, for example, let's say it's junk. It's just a string. Let's say it's junk. Okay, it simply does not exist. So the consequence is this part over here, I'm going to say star. The star over here will always evaluate to true. Sorry, always evaluate to false. Because you can see this serial number here is not equal to the junk. This serial number over here is also not equal to the junk. And this one here is also not equal to the junk. So it will always evaluate to false. And also means this part over here, the star inside the if statement is never executed. It's never executed. If it is never executed, what will be its final value when we try to return? Up to this point over here, since this is never executed, so that means index remain to be the initial value that we propose to actually initialize to be, right? It's a 0. And we are going to see that index value will be 0, less than 0 will be false, which means we're going to bypass this part over here, right? You can see we already know that's false. It's actually not correct because we are not returning null in this case, given that the junk is not a non-existing serial number, okay? So what's going to happen is we're actually going to return over here, index will just remain to be its default value 0 over here. And what's going to happen is we're going to return the this.entries, so rs.entries at index 0, and then get products, which will be this particular products. We're saying that this particular product has the associated serial number junk, so that's wrong. All right, so this is why we want to really set the initial value for index to be -1 rather than 0. In the case where the default value -1 is never getting overwritten by some valid index, that would mean the input serial number does not exist. So that's why we'll return simply just null rather than some index 0 products over here. Okay, let me write it down, and then that's about what I want to say. So here, so this will mistakenly return the products at index 0. I'm here being a little bit imprecise. When I say the product at index 0, I really meant the product that's associated with the entry at index 0. That's really what I meant. But hopefully you understand that from before. Okay, so that's about the 3 points you want to understand in order to clarify this question. All right. Any follow-up to this question here from your fellow student? Any follow-up you want to ask?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
So when I was doing that part, you did ask on the video to try it yourselves,
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. So what I did, instead of creating an index, an integer index equal to -1,
Mm-hmm.
I had directly like a for loop,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of like the if statement was pretty much the same,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a return statement inside the if statement
I see what you
that
mean.
returns, and then in the return I just have null. Is that a best practice, or is that like
Yeah,
because
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Yeah, let me try to make, I think it's a very good question. Let me also, for the benefits of your fellow student, let me just make it even more precise, concrete. It's a good question. Thank you. If I understood correctly, I think what you meant to say was you didn't have this line here. You don't use an index. That's absolutely fine. What the solution I presented to you was not the only solution. It's only an example solution. So let's say here, rather than saying this, right? I presume what you meant was you're going to say return, not null. I don't think you meant null. You'll say return this, maybe just return E.
So I return this entries.
E.getProduct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, given that E is already assigned to this.entries I, I'm just reusing it. But I'm pretty sure in yours is equivalent. So E.getProducts over here. And then I think for this part over here, I think, let me just also delete it, okay? So for this part, since we don't have the index, so this part will not be applicable, okay? Let me just get rid of it. And then you're basically, the logic will be, given that we are able to exit from the loop, so that means we never get a chance to really find the matching serial number. So we'll simply say return null. So am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, that's exactly
Okay, very good. Yeah. Okay, I'm glad you brought it up. Actually, I would say for the simple example like this, I wouldn't say which one is better. Either you use my original solution using the index and then try to make some conditional judgment about index and then return accordingly. That's one way to go. In your solution, that's also good. I think as long as you really understand what the logic is, especially if you are able to get to this point, that means you never got this part here executed. You never get a chance to return earlier, so that you can just say return now. I would say these two are very good. Okay, they are equally acceptable. However, I would say there is certain debates about where you should really put the return statements for methods, or even for, the C language. You also got maybe the return statement as well. Well, C#, right? The C family language. I can give you a little bit of advice. So in your programming test, okay, number one, okay, in your lab or your programming test, you can use either way, either solution. Or if you got other ways to solve it, feel free, right? I wouldn't really interfere about how you should really implement the loop. I think the only requirements the main requirements I have for your lab and or your programming test is about not to use any Java API library like a collection array list. That's the only that's the main constraint I have. But in terms of how you implement your method itself about using the loop, that one's okay. However, I think it's also advised by quite many software engineers, experienced one, to say whenever you're programming methods, it's better to have a single return rather than multiple returns. So of course, in my case, I'm also having not a single return. I could have just said that I can just create some extra variable. Let me show to you. Okay, let me be precise. If I want to have the single return version, let's say I still got the index over there. So I would say here, I can say, since I'm going to return the products over here. So I can say products, and then I would say result is assigned to initially null. And then here I would say if the index that I calculated was negative, so that means the result, sorry, I meant the other way. If it's actually larger than or equal to 0, that means it was overwritten once. So result should be assigned to this dot entries I dot get products. So far, I have not used any return statement so far, and then I have only a single return at the end. Return result. Okay, so here. Okay, and then I'll put it here. When your method has multiple returns, in general, especially when your method gets maybe needs more lines of code or gets just more complicated algorithmically, in general, it becomes harder to judge its correctness. Instead, this is only my advice, and if I mean, again, for the simple scenario like for get products, it doesn't really matter which one you use. But I would say if you're programming something that's reasonably complicated, you really want to consider have only a single return at the end. Okay. Instead, use a single return at the end. Okay, that's my advice. Great. Does that answer your question?
Oh yes, it does. It does.
Okay, very good.
I think I was just overthinking it, and
no, that's okay. I think sometimes, for some software design principle, I think it's better that we kind of focus on some simple example. I know it might be difficult for you to imagine that, of course, in this case over here, using either multiple return as you suggested or using this single return as I put over here, they are equally good. But you can also experiment yourself and try to reflect. As you try to program, not just in this course, but even for later, when your Java methods or C method or C# methods gets more and more complicated, using the single return version can arguably actually become easier for you to actually judge the correctness of your method. That's something you can keep in mind.
Because I think I was just thinking, if we had like a very long array, and like for
I see what you mean.
You gave us, it would always run until the end, but this one, if it's like in the middle, it would just stop. And that's like pretty much what I thought about.
That's very good thinking. I'm glad you also brought it up. I'm very happy. So let me go a little bit further. Okay. So there's a different issue. Okay, I see what you mean. But whatever I just said about single return, you can still keep it in mind. That's still valid. Let me just address the point you just mentioned. Okay. It's something I also kind of want usually my student from the first year to also understand, but I'll just review that together with you. Okay. So now here is some question over here. You're absolutely right. In this version, the number of iterations, okay, especially I'm talking about this loop over here. The number of iterations corresponds to. Can you help me out? Corresponds to what value?
The length minus 1.
Okay, you're saying that.
The length.
Are you trying to say this.entries.length minus 1?
The number of entries.
Which one?
It will just run through the whole number of entries that we have.
Exactly, right? Yeah, you're right. So the number of iterations we'll get is actually not this one. So this is not correct because, for example, let's say if this is your entries array, let's say, and the fixed size, it really depends on the requirement. Let's say we say that the maximum number of entries you can have is maybe 100. So that means you got up to 99 over here. However, as specified by this exit condition over here, we will only execute up to, but excluding this.noe. So NOE could be maybe just here, maybe only up to, for example, 54. Let's say this here. Let me put NOE over here. NOE is equal to 54. Let's say in that case, you will actually only get to iterate through. Oh, sorry, only up to here, from 0 up to 53. So let me just write it better, 53. That's actually what you will execute, right? So only the yellow part that you will scan through. So it's really important to know precisely this is not the number of iterations you'll run, but instead this.noe minus 1 should be the number of iterations. Okay, let me just emphasize that as well. So this will be this.noe minus 1. All right. So here's the, let me just try to present the whole story. And here's the follow-up question. What if this.noe is large? Realistically, maybe this.noe could be maybe 1 million, meaning that you have already stored 1 million different apps maybe in the store, or 1 million different products into the store. That's very realistic, right? For example, 1 million. But the products with the matching serial number exists in the early part of the array. For example, let's say, let me just go back to my point over here. Let me just say here, let's say this is 1 million, just for example. And then we got 1 million entries. However, the entry that actually got the matching serial number could be just here. Let's say this one is with the matching serial number. This is definitely one of the possible cases. Matching serial number. In that case, this loop will still actually force you to actually go over all the 1 million entries, no matter how early you may have found the match, right? So that's basically your question. So now here's the exercise to see. So here's a challenge. How can we exit from the loop as soon as a matching serial number is found? And given that we learned before that having multiple returns may not be the most ideal situation you want to run into, right? Without having multiple returns. Yeah, just bear with my writings over here, just running out of space, right? So that's really the final challenge I'm giving. We want to make sure the exit from the loop as soon as a matching serial number is found, number one. And number two, we want to say without having multiple return. So these are the two things we want to satisfy, right? So any idea how to do it? With, of course, the one you put before having multiple returns, you can definitely satisfy this part over here, but you wouldn't satisfy this part. Is it possible to satisfy both parts?
Should we just add a break inside the if statement then?
Yeah, in some way, yeah, I see what you mean. But in some way, the break and return, they are kind of in the same category. It is to actually there's some you can feel. Next time you can drop by my office hour. I can give you more reference. But I think people actually talk about the return and also break is something that you want to avoid. You want to minimize their use as much as possible. Otherwise, you will just make your code unnecessarily complicated and hard to really trace.
Can you?
So, any other idea? Very simple.
I think you can. So for the loop, like the condition I is less than this NOE, we can add another condition to it.
Okay, very good. Okay, awesome.
And index equals to, equals -1, -1, because when it's not -1, it's gonna exit.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. So what you're saying is, okay, so you're saying we can strengthen this particular condition to be I less than this dot NOE and I is equal to -1, something like that, right? Yeah, because this is a conjunction over here, so that as soon as the index is assigned to something that's valid, larger than or equal to 0, this part will become false. So that means we'll exit from the loop. That's what you meant, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I like that solution there. This is absolutely acceptable. However, it may not be as general as possible because in your because in your general loop, you may not actually have the index to be reassigned. You may get other things. Maybe you want to reassign some object reference variable. Maybe you want to reassign certain things, right? So I think another solution you can consider, which I can also recommend you explore that, is to introduce a boolean variable. I can say boolean over here. Let's say match not found is assigned to true. Okay, so this is to say as long as we actually have not found a match, we're going to keep this boolean variable as true. Okay, and then I can now, a second solution could be, okay, so now the second one, so this is solution number 1, and number 2 will be I strictly less than this.noe, and also match not found. Okay, so that means we're going to put inside this if statement here, as soon as we can reassign the index to be something that's not -1, we can say match not found is assigned to true. Oh, sorry, match not found is assigned to false. In some way, this is actually a more general solution. You're using some boolean variable dedicated for this purpose, rather than referring to the index. So actually here, I meant to say index over here. Because not necessarily for every loop you want to write, you will use the index variable. Okay, does it make sense to you?
Yes.
All right,
general,
good. Sure. Anyway, so I just go back to your very original question. Your intention is you want to maybe exit from the loop so that you don't have to go over the large array size one by one. It's definitely a good concern. However, we don't want to compromise our code quality by using too many returns or even break. And we want to minimize that as much as possible. That's why I'm recommending you can use a boolean variable over here to control the entrance and exit of your loop. If you look at your week number 3 lectures on exceptions, you will see something similar. You will see that as well. Okay, just some feedback to your question here. Any follow-up to this? Okay, good. I hope that makes sense. I think, yeah, it's a very good question here. I think it's really important to get these kind of confusion or unclarity clarified, right? Okay, so that's about the only Google question I had, Google Doc question I had on the web. Do you guys have any more questions related to part 2 of the tutorial? Yes.
Yes, I have a quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So actually, I have 2. So the first question is, since the other student just brought up the issues of like searching efficiency, right? Like, can we just exit the loop once we found a
match,
like an element that match, right? So I'm just wondering, like, probably it's out of the range of this cost, like. But say if we actually have a million like elements in the array, right? We have what
elements?
Like 1 million, like 2
million.
1
million. Yes, correct. Yes, actually, you know what? Yes and no. At this point, either using early exit version, either with maybe this version here or this version here, or simply got return statement here, using that, or you simply got this to make sure you always the number of iterations simply just not reduced, just always corresponding to NOE. Either solution is acceptable at this point. Okay? At least for your programming test and lab, we don't really worry too much about the performance. However, I think towards the end of the course, we will speak about asymptotic upper bound, like a time complexity of methods. In that case, you should really understand this kind of a concept when we speak about it. So at this point, it's okay. Either solution is fine. But I think you deserve some thorough discussion about this. But as we approach the final discussion about time complexity of methods, in that case, you have to understand the whole story about why this version over here potentially could save you some time at the runtime.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Second question.
So my second question is about the RefurbishedStore.java
Yes.
file. So we have NOE to refer to the number of elements
Entries.
in the entries, right? In the array.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, like, is it a better practice if we make this NOE a static variable?
No, not really. Okay, go ahead. Go on. If do you have got any parts for the same question, or that's it? You're just wondering if NOE should be static.
Because because my understanding is that if it's like because static variables belong to
The class.
a class, right?
Yeah.
But say if we have a class, and we for each instance that we create,
Yeah.
we say we just we add NOE, like we increment NOE by 1, right?
Yeah.
But if we have NOE, this variable that's attached to a specific like each individual instance, isn't it a better practice if NOE is belong to their class? Like, so each instance that we create, the static variable, and then we add it by 1.
Okay. You're basically asking, would it be a good practice if we try to add static to maybe the NOE? That's your question. Okay, I'll answer that. Yeah, that's why I'm trying to set it up. So add entry over here, and then let's see entry E. Let's not worry about the entry definition. You can refer to that on your tutorial code. So this entries, I'll say ES, and then this NOE is assigned to E. And also this dot NOE plus plus. Okay. Let's now compare these two. Okay, so here, let's now just talk about the blue version, and I'll modify that by adding static. Okay, let's say this. In this case, let's just consider two things. Let's say I got refurbished store. Store number 1 is new refurbished store. And also I got refurbished store S2. And then new refurbished store over here. And if I say S1.add entry. Okay, let's just say we pass an anonymous object over here, right? You know how to do anonymous objects. And also we say S2.add entry. And also some other anonymous object for entry. Okay, let's redo that. Let's talk about this correct version. What's going to happen is we got S1 is going to point to some refurbished store objects, and then the NOE will be 0 to begin with, and also the entries array, right, is going to be array like this, right? Okay. And similarly, let me just be a little bit lazy here. We're going to get S2. Like that, okay? Here we got S2. Okay, we got these two objects. And then when we say S1.add entry, right? What's going to happen is we're going to add some objects over here for entry, and then increment this to 1. And when we say S2.add entry, we're going to add an entry over here, and then increment it to 1. So far, we should have no issue, right? Let's think about what's going to happen if we modify this to be static. That's what you were asking, okay? If we do that, what's going to happen is like this. Let me use the pink to actually specify, okay? If we actually say static over here, and that's something you would have learned maybe from the first year, whenever you have something that is static, so that means it is global. Single copy of value shared by all refurbished store objects. So the way we visualize would not be like this, to say this S1 got a local copy of, this S1 got a local copy of NOE, and this S2 have a separate copy of NOE. That's not how we visualize it. So how we're going to do it is like this. We're going to say over here, we have a global value over here for NOE, right? This is global. And maybe initially you want to set it to be 0, for example. Let's say this. And then let's now go over these lines again, right? When I do S1, so S1 again is going to point to some refurbished store objects, and we don't have NOE anymore. It does not belong there. So it will be entries array, and then some array over here. Similarly, we're going to create S2. That's also going to be some refurbished store objects, entries array over here. Okay, so far so good. Let's see exactly what's going to happen here. When we say s1.addEntry, we're going to store the new entry according to corresponding to the value of NOE. So that'll be index 0. Store that over here. And then remember, we're going to say NOE++. If we do that, it's going to be increment to 1. And when we try to execute this one over here, what's going to happen? It's not going to be stored in index 0 anymore to start with. It's going to be stored in index 1. Okay, index 1 over here. So this will be the new entry. And then it's going to be incremented to 2. Apparently you can see that it's not right. That means for every subsequent add entry you call, you're always going to reuse the global value over here rather than the local value that's stored in the individual objects. Right? You can see here we're wasting this slot over here. It's not storing anything. Does it make sense to you?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I think it's good thoughts about why we don't really use this. It's actually for this reason. So static or non-static, you have to make a judgment very carefully. So the principle will be, think about if the value you're trying to use, for example, NOE here, should it be a local thing that every store should have? Or should it be a global thing using static where all the refurbished store objects should really share? Apparently, making the global is not appropriate in this case. Okay, I hope that's clear to you.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Good. Okay, let's say one private question over here. If two entry objects have the same serial number, okay, with the implementation in the lab, would the getProducts method? Okay, so I think it depends on whether you can make that assumption about if the serial number can be duplicated. I think for your lab zero part 2, we simply assume that for every entry object we add into the store, like over here, and they just got unique, they don't have any duplicated serial number. I think for the lab, well, for your programming test, it will be made very clear whether you can make that assumption or not. If you cannot, then you have to do something that's conditional, right? You're gonna refer to the instruction. But I would say in general, whether or not you can make that assumption, you have to refer to the requirements, like a problem that's specifying the instruction. Okay. Okay, so that's about the. So guys, any more follow-up question related to your tutorial series, part 2? That's the final part for the tutorial. Any follow-up to it? Yes.
I had 2 questions.
Go ahead.
The first one is relating also to the the 2 returns that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, we went back. Here in your example, if we want one return, I've seen in some examples online, people using, I think it's called the conditional operators, the question mark and the,
Mm-hmm.
and the. So would that be considered as 2 return, or since it's written in 1 line, we would actually,
Okay.
it would
Yeah.
mean that it's one,
Sure.
one return?
Yes, let me address your question first. You're basically asking, well, but guys, don't worry about this conditional operator, which I normally don't cover in my class. It's more like an additional stuff you can explore on your own. You can feel free to learn it by yourself and use it, but it's not the standard one I would normally expect my student to know. But since you mentioned that, I can mention that quickly. Alternatively, what we can do over here is to say return, and then we can say index larger than or equal to 0. Is that true or false? If it is true, we're going to return this particular expression over here. We can say this dot entries index I dot get products and colon, otherwise you'll be null. So that's the conditional operator. Yeah, so for those of you who might be interested in this operator, you can simply Google for conditional operator for Java, right? You put a Boolean condition over here, and then you can think about if this is true, then do this. Otherwise, do this. A little bit like that. But back to your original question. If you have expression like this, it will be considered as a single return syntactically. You'll be okay. Yeah, but I would say again, let me just go back to my point. Don't be too much worried about whether you have multiple return or a single return for simple programs. I think that the advice I really want you to keep in mind, because you only follow what you think that's most intuitive to you when you do programming. So I think something you want to always keep yourself in mind is if you got multiple returns, inherently it's just going to make your program a little bit harder to justify its correctness. For simple programs, this may not be an issue. Definitely not. But for a more complicated program, maybe it will be an issue. Especially when you get to maybe 2011 data structures, when you want to implement a tree, or maybe implement hash table, implement a graph. In that case, individual methods will be much more complicated. In that case, you may want to use a single return. Just make it easier for you to judge how your method is going to return its value. And when you get to 3101 for algorithm course, that's even the case. So I would say, yeah, for this course, it's really both are. I can almost say that both are acceptable. Yeah.
Okay.
Second question. Yeah.
So the other question is when we are doing public entry and get entry method.
Yeah.
So you did mention that in the for loop we should always use this.noe.
Yeah.
But again, when you look at the method, we are creating an array and initializing that array with the length of noe. So would use because I tried to use it and it didn't really give me any problem. If I use only es, not using this entry that length, but I use the array that we just initialize on the top.
Yeah. And
use that length for that. Would that still be a mistake? Because I tried it and it didn't give me no null.
I'm not. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure about the exact code you have been writing. If you can feel free to show it to me during my office hour, I can definitely take a look and then tell you why you didn't get to an error. I'm saying that in general, when you got this particular programming pattern, when you can see, especially let's highlight what's the issue here. You can see. Okay, let me highlight here. You can see the current value for NOE is actually 3. That means from 0 until NOE minus 1. This particular range of indices, they will have their their slots over here non-null. Okay. Right. Let me just write it down just for your fellow student as well. Entries non-null. Okay. Let me highlight it. So the green one, 1, 2, and 3. And the remaining part for the array is going to be null, right? Symmetrically in some way. Okay. So let's talk about the loop. Now I was thinking. Let's say if I say for integer I initially to be 0, so that means we start from here. And then let's say we don't use this.noe. We say I strictly less than, let's say this dot entries dot length. And then I++. Okay. So I will try to I'll try to guess what you may have done. Okay, I'll try to guess. So let's say here I say this.es.length. And in this case, the length will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's going to be 5. Meaning that we're going to look at indices 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them. Okay. Let me write some code which will not cause any exception. Okay, like a null pointer exception. For example, I might simply say entry E is simply assigned to, let's say, this.es at position I. Let's say this is the only line of code I write in my loop. In this case, I claim that I'm not going to run into any null pointer exception, for the reason that for every iteration, E is actually going to point to wherever that particular index is pointing to. This is going to be for the first iteration. For the second iteration, E is going to point to wherever index 1 is pointing to, and etc. What about for the fourth iteration over here, when I is equal to 3? In that case, it's actually pointing to null. So that means E is also going to point to null, just pointing to nowhere. So if you only write this line, this part over here might be null. That's my point.
Yes. So
yeah, just give me 1 more minute. Let me finish this, and then I will take your follow-up. Yeah, just bear with me. So that will be one thing we want to understand. So starting from, let me be precise in case your fellow student might need it. So starting from I is equal to 3. E will be equal to null, right? Might be null, right? It will be null. And let me just try to write one more line to actually will cause the null pointer exception. If I simply say E dot get products, if I just add this extra line into the code, for example, may not be doing something very useful, just for illustration. If I do that, it's going to make a huge difference, because when now I reach the I being 3 over here, E is going to be assigned to wherever 3 is pointing to, which is null. In that case, if I say null.get products, it's going to give me null pointer exception. So this is why you don't want to use this.es.length, because there might be some remaining slot in the array that's actually null. Instead, you should only use the index this.noe to make sure you only go up to this point over here for iteration. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, that part makes sense. But, but my question was, like for this method that we created, we had an array that we initialized locally with the length of this.noe, right? So my question is, in the for loop, can we take the length of that local array that we just initialized with the length of NOE, and we just do that length? Because
I see what you mean. Yeah, that's another question. Okay, so you understand this part, I believe, right? This part here is okay so far. Okay, I think what you're posing was, I think what you're posing is another observation, which is also very nice. Let's say this, for example. Let's say for your whatever method you're declaring, okay, let's say in the context of the refurbished store, let's say. So you're saying, for example, we got some local array, let's say entry array, let's say, I would say entry, let's say EA would be a new array over here, entry. And then we got this.noe, yes, right, that's good. So now you're trying to run a loop, and then you can say integer I is initialized to be 0, and then I is strictly less than EA.length, and then I++, and then you do something over here. So you were asking about this version over here, is that correct? Okay, so this will be okay. I'll put a check. Yes, because it's actually in some ways logical, because you initialize the size of this array to be of size this.noe. So when you say EA.length is equivalent to saying this.noe, they're simply equivalents. On the other hand, in this case, when you say this.entries.array.length, it's actually it's not necessarily equal to NOE. It's actually larger than or equal to NOE. Yeah, so they're different. Yeah. Does it make sense to you, I hope?
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you very much.
No problem. I think it's really important to clarify this. It's very important. Good. So let me just make a further notes over here. This guy here is larger than or equal to this.noe. Okay, good. All right. Guys, any more question? I can see John, your hand is still up. Okay, no problem. Okay. You got a question? Yeah.
My question was related to the worksheet about reference typed and multi-valued attributes.
Okay.
Like it's relating to what we're talking about here as well. So in that example, we have the array that we already have full of different point objects.
Yep.
And then we're trying to get the ones that are just in quadrant 1.
Mm-hmm.
So we make another array.
Yep.
Put all the objects that have points in quadrant 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then we make a different array and put, because see the one with just points in quadrant 1 will have some like maybe towards the end of the array we'll have some like empty or like null.
Is this the method you're talking about?
Objects. Yes.
Okay.
No. Page 6 and 7. Yeah, page 6 and 7.
Yeah, this one. Oh, sorry. Not this one. Yeah, let me go back. Beg your pardon. Here. This is the method, right?
Yeah, all the way up. Yeah.
Can you tell me which line you're confused? Tell me which line.
So what I wanted to ask is like, why instead of returning just, sorry.
John, let me guess. You might be wanting to ask, rather than creating this local array over here, why don't we simply just return PS?
Is it to avoid the null objects in the end, or like?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Okay. So John, to really give you credits for this question here, I want to also talk about it on the iPad. So I think your fellow student can also benefit. That's a good question. Okay. Let me put it here. Give me one moment. So John's question was like this. Would it be okay? Let's say we simply don't try to create this extra array over here. We don't do that. Let's say we simply don't do that. And then rather than returning Q1 points, we simply return just PS. That was a question. Okay. And John, your answer was actually correct, because in general, PS over here, in case the points that we need to collect is not all the points from the initial array, then we might have some null slots. Okay, let me just give one example here. Let's say we got points. Let me see where I can. Okay. It's let me just write down this, in general. Let's say we got PS over here, and then in that particular example, okay, in that particular example, you can see that we actually have added, let me just go to the notes over here. Okay, I'll show to you. In that particular example, you can see we have added 1, 2, 3, and 4. We added 4 points over there. And then the initial capacity of the points, John, do you remember what it is? Is it 10 or? I think there was some fixed size. I forgot. Oh, 100. Okay, it's 100. Okay. Okay, let me say this. What's happening over here is this.
So are you sharing that clip?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So what's happening is this, for that example in the written notes. So points array is the attributes. That one there initially will fixed, is always fixed to be of size 100. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and then all the way to 99. In that particular example, we got 4 points added, right? 4 points over here. 1, 2, 3, and also 4. Let me just look up very quickly about what they are, very quickly. So that'll be, okay, 3, 4 minus 3, 4. So 3, 4 minus 3, 4 minus 4, 3. Minus 3, 4, and 3 minus 4 minus 3 minus 4. Okay, and we want to eventually return an array that will actually get all the points in the first quadrants. So only this point is supposed to be returned. Only this 3, 4. Only that one is in the first quadrant. Okay, and as you go through the note, it will show to you after executing this loop over here, the local array PS is actually going to only point to this points over here, only that. Whereas all the other slots will just be null. right? Because only that point will be in the first quotient. But if you only return this PS, it will depend on how the corresponding JUnit test has been set up, right? For example, if the corresponding JUnit test is saying assert true, and then we might say PointerCollector.getPointsInQuadrantI, right? Just a short form. And then that's an array, and then we say the length should be equal to 1, right? If that's one of the assertions, your method over here is going to fail, because if you only return this array, what's its length? 1, 2, 3, 4, which does not match 1. So that's not going to pass.
And also we would get, like, if we try to run methods on some, let's say like ps dot get points in quadrant 1 at, let's say, like 2, and get, let's say, get x, that will give us the null pointer exception, right?
Yes, correct. So, okay, let's just talk about this alternative solution here. So number 1 is going to fail, right? This is going to fail, okay? And number 1. And number 2, if you try, for example, if you say assert true, you can even try system and out the print line if you wish. If I say pc.get point in quotient 1, let's say is an array. If you try maybe index 1, right? It's really referring to this index over here. And then maybe you say .get x. You want to say get x would be equal to maybe 3, for example. Let's say that's what you're trying. In that case, you're going to run into null pointer exception, because this part over here is actually null. So you're going to get into null pointer exception. Okay, makes sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Very good. Wow, guys, we got a very good question today. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, any more questions you want to ask about the part 2 tutorial? Anything? Anything else? Okay, let's see this. I see some question over here. What are the advantages of using anonymous referencing over just declaring a variable? Okay, the question was about when should you use anonymous objects. I would say you only use anonymous objects when you don't want to give a name to the objects, basically, right? It sounds a little bit weird, but let's say this. For example, let's say let's say talk about a point example, right? If you have a point collector, you can say pc.addPoint. Let's say what you're expecting over here is some point objects. So here, either you can say new and then point 3, 4. So this is actually so-called anonymous object, right? It's without any name. That's what we cover in the tutorial. So anonymous objects. Alternatively, you can also say point, let's say P1, which is just the same line as this, point, and then 3, 4. In that case, you can say pc.addPoint. And then over here, you can say P1. So I can give you a little bit small principle over here when you want to use an anonymous object, when you should not. Okay. So now you want to think about, do we need to invoke any methods on P1, which is this reference over here, right? Do we want to say, for example, P1 move up over here may move up by 2 units? Do we need to do that? If yes, then this solution over here, right? We talk about solution 1 and 2. Then solution number 1 is not good. Would not allow you to do that. Because you kind of lost the reference of P1. in solution number 1. If you don't really need it, in that case, then you can feel free to use solution number 2, because you don't need to create a like a variable that you never use. All right, I hope that makes sense about when you should use anonymous objects. Okay, I hope that answered your question on the chat, right? That was a private question. I hope you actually are okay with the response. All right. Okay, good. Very good. Guys, any more questions? All right, for those of you who are willing to stay until now, right? We still got 20 minutes for the session. I would suggest 2 things over here, right? I do want to give you a little bit benefits by going over something with you. I think number 1, for your lab number 1, right? I may not have time to repeat what I said to section B yesterday about lab 1, but the recording is already, let me show you exactly what you should go, where you should go about lab 1. I kind of went together with them to get started with lab 1, so you can do the same thing. I'll show you how to do it. Again, go back to the 2030 lecture site, click on the recording from click on the recording from yesterday, and then you will see that under the video section description, you will see towards the end. So there, starting from this particular time, I talk about lab 1, walk through requirements, highlights, and tips. So I would suggest you guys actually go over that. So that will actually help you get started if you haven't done so. I think I do encourage you to really get started right now for your lab 1. Otherwise, you might have a hard time finishing that by next Friday. Okay, so that'll be number 1. Number 2 is about the written test number 1. Maybe I can go over that quickly together with you in case you got any questions, okay, about written test. Let me just go back to written test 1. So the guide, preparation guide for written test 1 is posted on this site over here for the lecture, right? There's one guide, written test 1. In case you don't know, you can also refer to the early announcement I made today. I also included the link for this guide. If you click on that, okay, so that's about the written test 1. Let me just go over the policy together quickly with you, so you can be clear. It's going to be strictly individual, so don't collaborate in any way. And you will be given 20 minutes to complete the submission. I don't know yet, like how many questions you are going to be assigned, but there will be some easy question or straightforward question to answer, and there will be some question that will take some tracing, will take some time to actually do the thinking. So it really depends. Okay, but according to your syllabus, each of your written tests will be 6% of your final grade. And then for your written test, you don't need to download any starter projects or anything. You just go to the e-class, and then there will be a link called written test 1. So I will go over a little bit with the written test practice 1 together with you. The format will be identical. Okay, I'll get there in a moment. Okay, so as that's basically consistent with your syllabus. The submission will be open for 24 hours between 2 p.m. Thursday and 2 p.m. Friday next week. Okay, September 30th and also October 1st. But during the 24 hours, you have to choose a 20 minutes block yourself. So it's quite flexible for you. You want to choose maybe in the evening, you want to choose in the early morning or in the afternoon, doesn't matter. Just choose a time that you don't have any other, maybe other commitments you can focus. So you will get only a single attempt for 20 minutes, right? As soon as you say, I want to start the attempt, there will be a timer imposed by eClass. Even if you log out, or even if there might be some issue with your browser or frozen browser, the timer will still continue. So you want to make sure you really try to get the best condition as you can for your computer and for yourself and do the test. Okay, about 20 minutes. Okay, and then the format, more than 70% of the tests will be mainly multiple choice. So here I just gave you some example over here, especially for there will be a kind of multiple choice where you got multiple correct answers. So here I just give you the marking scheme. You can read it over, and you've got any confusion, you can let me know, right? So these are the possible questions. It is only possible that you might be asked to write some very small fragment of Java code. I don't know yet, but it's possible. So I want you to get prepared as well. What about the coverage? I think that might be important to go over. For the coverage, you assuming that you have gone through all the tutorial videos, you may have been taking some notes yourself, or maybe been writing some comments on your code. Maybe just review them very quickly and know how things work together, especially about tracing, about aliasing, about how method calls, etc. Okay, I've just provided a link for the tutorial videos there for you. the notes I made available to you. You can go over them if you wish. And also the slides over here. Let me show to you. If you click on that, it's going to be this classes and object slides. However, you don't really need to go. You only go until slide 74, only until the end of the helper method. I haven't really reviewed static variables. I did a little bit actually in today's session, but this part of the slide will not be covered. Okay, only until slide 74. Okay, let me go back. Okay, and then you got written notes. So one is about how you can infer the classes and method from the JUnit test methods, and also how you can manipulate the multi-value attributes reference type. That's also something we talk about today. Okay, and also for what you're supposed to start on Monday, you're supposed to get started with the lecture on exceptions over here, right? So next Wednesday and Thursday, I will be holding Q&A on answering any question you might have related to the coverage for the written test, including the exceptions lecture. Okay, that you definitely get a chance to clarify all your doubts before you take the test. All right, let me see. And there's some study tips. You can go over them, but I think tracing Java code will be very important thing, right? It's not really like a programming test where you simply just try to write Java program to pass the test cases. I think for the written test, it's more about the other way. You want to maybe give it some Java code. How do you trace it, right? Okay, example test. Let me also talk about it, right? I made available some example tests on the E-class section, and notice that they will be closed before 2 p.m. on next Thursday, right before the test starts. So during the test, it's not going to be available to you. So if you want to try them out, you want to try it out as soon as you can, okay? And then it's also important to note the test is only for getting yourself familiar with the formats about the questions, but it may not cover all the topics that might be appearing in the test. So you do want to study completely based on section 4 over here. Sorry, based on this section over here about the coverage, which is over here, section 3. Okay, over here. You want to study that carefully. All right, finally, before I take any of your questions, let me go to E-class. And then I want to show to you the written test, the example test. Go to E-class. Oh, I'm glad it's not crashed. Good. Go to section here. And then you can see under written tests, you should only see practice written test 1. Okay, if you go there, you can see it's already open for submission. I think some of your fellow students have already been trying. You can submit for as many times as you like before it closes. Okay, it will be closed precisely this time over here on the Thursday when you got when the test starts. And you can simply go there, and then you will see there are 6 or 7 questions over there, which will give you some idea about the formats for the question. But for the best outcome for the best performance of your test, you have to study. You want to go over the study materials we have made available to you so far. Okay. Okay, so that's about something I want to go over with you about written test 1. Do you have any questions related to the written test? Any question for you? Anyone? I'll pause a moment to see if you got any more questions for today. Okay, have a good day. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, guys, I'm willing to stay if you got more questions. So I will pause a little bit. If you have to go for other classes, other commitments, feel free. The recording will be available to you later today. Okay. I'll pause maybe for another minutes to see if you got any more questions for me. If no, then off you go. You can just get some work done for the course. Let me see. Again, I don't know how many questions there will be. I haven't designed a test yet myself. So there will be some question that will be straightforward. There will be some question that might require more thinking. So if I just give you a magic number, it will not help you much, right? But it's for 20 minutes. Okay, any more questions? All right, seems like everybody's okay. All right, so guys, take care, and then I'll see you next week for the Q&A. All right.